Hey, welcome to the podcast Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction. More importantly, it's about recovery. My name is Casey Scott. Normally we'd be going to Dr. Matt, but today that's not going to happen. What we're going to do is recap an older episode of a friend and colleague of mine. His name is Alema Harrington. You might know him because he does the halftime for the Jazz. He's the Mr. Mac guy. He's been a Utah staple for many, many years, who battled substance abuse and addiction and now is doing wonderful things in the world of recovery. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring up Alema's podcast and kind of go over that once again is because when I'm out and about, a lot of people will come up to me and they'll go, Casey, what's with your industry? Because, myself have an addiction problem, Alema Harrington. We've had a couple other notable Utah TV personalities battle addiction. We've had Randall Carlisle on the podcast who has battled addiction and is doing wonderful things at Odyssey House. And they think it's something to do with our industry. And although our industry is fast-paced and does lend itself to certain things, I don't think it's an industry problem. I think it's a societal problem. I think that's what it is. And the reason ours addictions and our problems become so noteworthy or talked about is because we've spent the majority of our life in front of the public on TV. And so when we mess up and we battle things, that makes the news. But I don't think it's our industry that makes us an addict. I don't think there's any industry out there that makes somebody an addict. I think it's societal, and I think it's genetics, and I think it's trauma, and whatever it is that leads you into that area. But I wanted to talk a little something about the owners of this podcast, KSL. Here's the thing, and I tell this all the time when I'm out doing live TV interviews. When you do the news and you make the news, that doesn't make the news happy. And that's exactly what I did with my DUI and my wreck and what happened to me. And I knew it was going to be a TV story. So I don't know if I've ever told this on the podcast, but when I got into my accident and I'm laying on the ground, sirens are going, smoke is in the air, and I knew my life was forever going to be changed. When I got back to my house, I made two calls. One, I called the uni, which is now the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, and said, I need your help. I need to be there. And that's when I checked myself into detox and started my road to recovery. The second call I made to KSL. And I called the news desk and I said, hey, this is what happened. And I just want to give you guys heads up because it's going to be a big news story. And I need you guys not to be blindsided by it. I think I owe you this, and so I'm telling you this. And after this, you won't be able to talk to me because I'm going into detox. And the reason I did that was because I knew it was going to be news. I knew it was going to be everywhere, and they took a chance on me, so I didn't want them to be blindsided, like I said. And after that, I thought for sure my career in broadcast and television was going to be over. And lo and behold, 3 years later, they called me back and they offered me my job. But the unique thing I think about KSL is I knew my undoing was going to be newsworthy. I didn't think my comeback was going to be newsworthy. And KSL has made that newsworthy. They've given me my job back. At no point has anyone ever came to me and said, hey, lighten up on your sobriety. Not on my sobriety, but on how vocal you are about it. And as a matter of fact, they let me lean into it. And any chance I get to go out and tell my story in communities, schools, whatever it is, if I ever need the time off, KSL says take it. They want me to share my story. They want my story to be able to help somebody else find their sobriety and find their recovery. So what I want people to realize out there when you find your favorite celebrity or you're a musician or somebody who is going down, it seems to be everyone always wants to talk about the undoing. But why can't we talk as much about the undoing as we do why can't we talk more about the recovery than the undoing, if that makes sense? I'm getting a little lost in my thoughts here, but what I'm saying is that KSL celebrates my recovery. They gave me a second chance, and they're giving me the ability to go out and tell my story. So let's be as vocal as we can for those in recovery as we do for those in addiction, because recovery is what makes it all worth it. It gives you that second chance. And if we can celebrate people's recovery, those who are battling addiction right now might know that there's life after, because there is. And life does get better. So when you're listening to Alema's story today, think of all the wonderful things he's doing now in recovery. And it's because he's sober that he's allowed to do those. So with that, I give you Alema Harrington. Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, about recovery. And it's brought to you by useonlyasdirected.org. They've got a 3-part solution: speak out, opt out, and of course, throw out. And make sure you talk to your doctor, and we want to thank them for all their help. Dr. Matt, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Big show today. Alema Harrington. We're going to get to him in just a second. But I wanted to talk to you real quick because you came in, you kind of disheveled, but your hair was blown back. You got the motorcycle out.
Yeah, riding the bike today. First day out.
What made you want to do that?
Ride the bike?
Yeah.
Oh, see, if you've been on a motorcycle, you don't ever have to ask that question, because it is such a wonderful, freeing experience to get on 2 wheels and just cruise a little bit. I can't say that I'm a big biker. I don't go to, the big conventions and all of that, but I love getting out and riding my Honda around. It's a lot of fun.
Do you have a shirt that says, "If you can read this, my girlfriend fell off"?
No, but I think I'll get one.
Right?
My girlfriend doesn't want to ride with me, so it would always be applicable,
Hey, I'm glad we got Alema here today, and we're going to talk to him in just a second. But I was thinking to myself as I was driving down here, I mean, with all the stuff that's going on right now, with COVID, job insecurity, housing, and so much, which seems to be a lot for normies, as we call people who don't have addictions, to deal with. Could you imagine what it's like right now for somebody who's also battling an addiction or a family member?
Well, we know that the relapses are up around the country. Substance abuse in general is up. People are turning to what they know, which are some bad habits, to kind of deal with that stress and anxiety. And it's a really tough gig right now to stay sober. So we're happy to be here and highlight some options and ways to help people stay sober during this time.
Now, a lot of industries and a lot of businesses are actually down right now, but you said the mental health field is really having an increase.
Busy. Yeah, it really is. And I think that's kind of, we've talked about in past shows, that maybe the next pandemic's going to be kind of a mental health pandemic. How do we, as a world, adjust to changes in how we work, how we go to school? I talk to parents whose little kids are having meltdowns with all the stress and pressure trying to figure out how to get their schoolwork done online, up to parents who have maybe lost a job or now they're underemployed and they're trying to figure out how to support their family. Many people reaching out to us on Facebook about their stresses with trying to stay sober or deal with an addiction, substance abuse. Am I addicted? Am I not? But people, as a joke, people are saying, "Oh, you can start drinking at 10 a.m. now," and it's like, no, that's not. You don't get a free pass. It's not healthy. But I get that. I get that. The stress and the boredom, right? That's another thing. Not being able. All the introverts are ruling the world, but the rest of us that are a little more extroverted, and we're not out seeing our buddies and shaking hands and doing all that stuff that makes us feel connected. You have to find alternative ways to feel connected. Otherwise, you sort of collapse in on yourself, and substance abuse can become part of that.
And Project Recovery wants to be a resource for you. Of course, you can hit us up on all our social pages. You can email us. And if there's anything we can do, we'd love to be able to help you out. But what we can do is give you another great episode. And today, we're super stoked. Alema Harrington, how are you, sir?
I'm doing so good.
And I've been trying to...
My mom would say, "You're doing well. You're not doing good." So let me correct I'm doing well.
Right.
I'm doing well. And I love the intro, Dr. Matt, that you just gave, and some insight as to, what we're dealing with, because as you talked about, Casey, there's normies out there struggling with this. And for us that are in that world of addiction and dealing with that, you add that layer on top of it, and it becomes a struggle. And it is that. So
it's a perfect storm.
I think some people who are in recovery might actually have a little advantage right now because the normies who have never drank every day and done those sorts of things, that they're starting down a path that can be very destructive. So if you have a little bit of time of sobriety under your belt, man, maybe it's an advantage. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to start out by saying, because you probably get this a lot, I got it quite a bit when I was first into the recovery world, is Alema Harrington. How did that happen to him? I mean, he was a superstar in football, a graduate, a TV guy. How did this happen to you?
Not you.
That doesn't happen to people like you. But then I want to go back and go, really? Let's go jack, all the celebrities, Ben Affleck. I mean, but addiction does not discriminate.
No, it doesn't. And I was one of those guys that got I guess in some cases, because I work as a substance use disorder counselor now, so I see all kinds of different clients and cases that come my way. And a lot of people start very early, like 13, 14 years old, right?
I was one of them.
And I wasn't in that category. I was the guy that grew, born and raised in Hawaii and was one of the few, LDS population is smaller, still large, but is smaller there. And so you're kind of a little bit different and people know like, oh, that's the Mormon kid and that kind of thing.
You can't play on Sundays.
Right, yeah. And can't play on Sundays. And so, I experimented a little bit in my high school days, but not really anything that was, over the top. I didn't really like weed when I first tried it, and alcohol, tasted terrible. And so it wasn't until my senior year in high school that I started to kind of do that senior party thing a little bit, and I found that I kind of like this and the social ease that I have. Because in spite of being, somewhat popular person, I still had this social anxiety, right? And then the alcohol, man, beer really helped that a lot. And so then I ended up at BYU, and I thought, well, I'll go to BYU. Nobody drinks there. And nobody does drugs there. And
former BYU grad.
And we laugh because we know the
true.
reality of there. To some degree, there's like an entire underground, or at least when I was there in the '80s, right?
Yeah.
There's this entire underground movement that is rebelling against, right, the what would be considered LDS social norms,
like a counterculture.
Right.
Didn't
Exactly.
Jim McMahon go to BYU?
Yes, he did. In fact, it's funny because my father, who was an entertainer in Hawaii and had a show in Hawaii for many years, he befriended Jim McMahon when Jim had just gone to the Bears, had been drafted. And so when Jim McMahon found out that my brother and I had committed to BYU, he was on his honeymoon in Hawaii, and so he tells my dad, tell the boys to come over and visit with me. So we go over this really plush hotel, and he's in there. He's got a cooler with beer in it in his hotel, right?
Yeah.
And so he's kicked back and he tells us these stories about his experience at BYU and how people didn't understand him and they were kind of jerks to him. He was the Catholic kid from Roy, and so we got kind of a preview of what that might end up looking like. But even for me going to BYU, I didn't consider myself a partier. I remember being on my recruiting trip at BYU, and there were guys that were partying, and I wasn't part of that group at that time. And so it wasn't until I started at going to school at BYU. And the first time that I was prescribed a narcotic, an opiate, was at BYU. And I had plenty of injuries as a high school football player and athlete, but never once had I been prescribed an opiate. And so I remember being in John Hall at Helaman Halls and coming back from the training room after practice with a little manila envelope that had my medications in it. At that time, you'd go see the doctor. If you had an injury during practice, then they say, okay, go see the trainer after practice, and then you might end up going to the doctor. You go to the doctor, and at that time, we had a pharmacy that was inside the locker room. So where the locker room was and the doctor's office was in the training room, you would go see the doctor, they would give you a prescription, or they would just let the pharmacist know. You'd walk over to the next door over, and that was the pharmacy, and they would give you your medication for the day. And it wasn't always narcotics. I mean, I want to be clear that it wasn't like that. So that's where you got all your dope. But that was the first time I was prescribed, and I had I was given Percocet and Soma. For those who don't know what Percocet is an opiate. Soma is a pretty powerful muscle relaxer. And it's a I'm not sure, Doc. Is it in the benzodiazepine category?
I think it is a benzo. Yeah.
But it's pretty. It's in.
It has addiction
It's there with Valium, at least in my opinion, Valium along with Xanax, and it's in that category. So one of the other players, older players that was experienced, told me, take one of these, take two of these, and I remember I took those, and I remember when it hit my bloodstream, it was like one of those moments where.
An aha moment.
It was a life-changing moment for me, because you got to consider that I'm at BYU as coming from Hawaii as this star football player, and now I'm at BYU and everybody's a star football player, and I'm buried on the depth chart. I'm not getting any reps in practice, and I'm feeling like really less than, not good enough, right? Which just accentuates all of these other inner feelings that maybe at some point might have been a little bit latent because I was, being successful in sports. But all of a sudden, I'm just really feeling that. And when those drugs hit my system, man, it just made me feel like I'm okay. Mm-hmm. And for me, I realized today, looking back on that moment, that was problematic. That was a problem, because it wasn't about the physical pain for me. It was how it relieved my emotional pain. And so it's, that's where it started for me. And then it
when
would
you're
be,
a kid, that feels good, right? Like,
oh, yeah.
Like when you're a kid, all of a sudden you found relief for that tension that you're just living with all the time. And when you're there, you're starting over. Like a lot of people this fall are going to try to figure out college, whether you're playing sports or not. And you might have been something in high school, but now it's like a reset.
Yeah.
But he's an athlete. He's been told to play through pain.
Play through the pain, but so I redshirted at BYU kicking, and to say I played was much overstated.
Yeah, I overstated mine too. That's okay.
Yeah. No, you don't. I do. But like you get there and all of a sudden you're nobody. You have to start from zero, right? And so even if physically you're doing well, you don't know that the coaches are even looking at you. You feel like nobody's looking at me. Mm-hmm. And so that tension, that anxiety, and it is problematic, but when you're a kid, it's magical.
Yeah.
You don't know that it's a problem.
Yeah, because we talk about, now as a counselor, I'm able to recognize that the drugs were not a problem for me. Drugs were my solution, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was the solution to my social anxiety. That was the solution to me feeling less than, not good enough.
Builds it's like a false confidence.
Absolutely. And for me, and especially at that time in my life, man, it was probably, you could even look back now and say that might have been life-saving for you, that you had that, because you get into a deep depression. Maybe I would have dropped out of school or something. But anyway, that's where it started for me. And then it was, when I got injured or when somebody else had some pills or whatever. And then I started drinking too my freshman year at BYU, and it was a different world back then. And I found that so a beer with some pills, man, that was amazing. The feeling of euphoria that I would get from that. And so it continued, and eventually, by the time I get to my senior season at BYU, it has spiraled completely out of control. And somehow I graduated. I have 2 back surgeries along the way. And for me, once I get into that chronic back pain, it's almost like, what else am I going to do? It's like my football career was marginal at best at that point, and I didn't have any hope that it was going to be what I had dreamed it was going to be.
NFL or anything like that.
So it's like at that point, it's just like, I kind of embraced this party scene kind of guy. And I was in Lavelle Edwards' office, pretty often for, getting in trouble and being put on double secret probation and be up at the standards office on the 7th floor. And so I was very familiar with what that was about. And the wild thing for most of us that end up in that spot, it's like I never imagined that that's how it was going to go for me. And eventually it did. In the end of my senior season at BYU, I had picked up my scholarship a year late because of the missions at that time had gone from 2 years to a year and a half. A bunch of guys came back. They held my scholarship till my sophomore season. And so I was done playing, but I was still on scholarship. And I'd had my second back surgery and was in a lot of pain and was doctor shopping, multiple doctors, and doing everything that I could to stay high all the time because that's felt good. And I had gotten a prescription and forged the prescription for the refills, which at that time you could sometimes alter. They're much more obviously careful about the way that prescriptions get passed today. But back then you could get away with some things, and I thought I was getting away with something. I went to a pharmacy to fill the prescription, and the pharmacist looked at me, looked at the prescription, looked at me, looked at the prescription, and he said, "Hang on a second." And as soon as he said that, I got scared, and so I left. And I remember I called our trainer at BYU. His name was George Curtis. You probably remember George.
Yeah.
Good guy, really good guy. And I said, George, I need some help. I think I have a pain management problem. Right? I didn't even consider that I might have an addiction, right? That I, had the disease of addiction. I had a pain management problem because what was happening was I hadn't managed this properly. So let me figure out. So he was able to get me into treatment. And really what I was doing, I was running from, I thought the DEA was going to, that was during the days of the battle ram. And, I thought they were going to come break down my door, which wasn't reality, but it scared me into treatment. And I went to a treatment facility for the first time in, I want to say this was like 89 or 90 was the first time I went to treatment. I've been to treatment, close to 10 times now. And so that first trip in treatment, I still remember going there thinking, well, I'm just going to see what this is like and maybe I can learn something about how to manage my pain. And
exploratory.
Yeah, right. And I remember being there was a 28-day program. I remember being in there. I tell this story sometimes. I was there, and I was in a group setting, which you're familiar with, Casey. And you're sitting in that circle of the group, and everybody's sharing, right? We're sharing our stories, and this lady is telling her story. She's saying, "Yeah, and I was using 30 pills a day between the Valium and the pain pills," and I remember thinking, holy, like this chick is sick, right? I'm like, man, it's a good thing you're here because you are really sick. And not realizing, because at that time I might use maybe 12 Percocet a day or something like that. I didn't realize,
still a ton of
right, by
Percocet.
the time I was done, tolerance was I was using 100 Lortab 5s a day. Right, and just the acetaminophen in that is enough to kill your liver,
your kidneys, and
and so I had no idea my first trip to treatment that how progressive this disease was. Right, I'm looking at this lady like, man, you are really sick, having no idea that if that's the gauge of your illness, then I would end up way sicker than that. So. Anyway, I go through treatment. I didn't finally get sober until my 5th time through treatment, and I lost a family along the way, and a wife and 3 kids, and we can explore more of the parts of that story, but the bottom line is when it came to a head for me, I had been sober for 8 years. I was working here at Channel 5. Myself, Craig Bowler, Jack, Sports Beat Saturday and Sports Beat Sunday with some good years.
I was working here. I was a camera guy.
As we're reliving this last dance with Michael Jordan, and Bowler and I actually just did a Ghostcast last night. Ghostcast, check it out on the Apple Store app. But as we did that last night, reflecting on what an amazing time for sports that was, right?
And
we were
for
just
Utah,
riding the crest. Right, BYU goes to the Cotton Bowl, and University of Utah basketball was in the Final Four in the championship game, and we are just living the dream. 2002, the Olympics come here, but something happened. Craig Bolerjack left Channel 5, and the assumption, at least for me, was okay. They're going to promote me to the weekday sports anchor.
You're the heir apparent.
Right, I'm the heir apparent. That didn't happen. And they say in recovery, that resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. And for me, I picked up a resentment, right, towards the person they hired instead of me, which was Tom Kirkland. I'm pretty open about that now. Tom Kirkland, the station, people in general, God, it's like, this is not fair. And it was at that point that I started to slip in what I thought I had as my recovery. And slowly but surely went into a complete spiral till in 2002, Channel 5, after the Olympics, did not renew my contract. That was at the end of a second 3-year contract at Channel 5. They did not renew my contract. And I was just, I was out on my own, and they were still paying my contract. They said, you know what, this is how bad it was. They're like, we're going to let you go, even though you're not done till August. You got 3 months left on your contract, but you can leave now. And the crazy thing, is that there was never anything said about my drug use. And I was having, ordering drugs over the internet through pharmacies and having it delivered here to Channel 5.
Wow.
Right? And in the dressing rooms downstairs in my locker, I had lines of cocaine and OxyContin lined up. And I mean, I was a freaking mess. I was a mess. But there was never any mention of that. They just, kind of quietly let me go.
Nobody ever confronted you
Nobody
about
ever
that?
confronted me about it, at least not that I can remember. And it's possible they did, and I didn't know it because I was so wasted. But, it was wild because that was during the Olympics, and we have Bob Costas in the building, and I'm back in the locker room. We're in the dressing room doing lines of coke and OxyContin just to get right. I'm not getting high at that point. I'm just getting straight. And so eventually, I end up back in treatment in 2002, and discovered something very, for me, important in my recovery today. And what I discovered was the people that had stayed sober. I'd gone to that treatment center 10 years prior to that in 92 and got sober for 8 years, got the job at Channel 5. Life was good. And then I go through this relapse. So aside from the resentment, which I touched on already, understanding how critical that is, not to have that in your life. They say, resentment, the way that it affects us, especially as alcoholics and addicts. For me, I recognize today that God, this light in my life, is that's what keeps me sober. I'm not capable of not drinking. I'm not. But God does that for me every day. So if I lose God, then I'm doomed. Because if I'm left to my own means, I'm going to drink again. I'm going to use again. And with resentment, it says, when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit and we drink again. And for us to drink is to die. This is what Bill W. wrote in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and just beautifully scripted. And so I get back to treatment, and I realize the importance of, you can't be picking up resentments. You got to have an outlet to let that go. And then secondly, the thing that I discovered, the guys that were still there that were sober, and there was more than a handful of them, and it was a large facility that I had gone through in Hawaii, and they continued to work with other alcoholics and addicts. And
the community.
The community, whether they were the chair of their AA, their chapter, or some of them were counselors, had gone back and become counselors, or they were working, as coaches, addiction coaches, or working on the facility. And I recognized at that point, that was the biggest difference. I thought I was active in church. I was like the elders quorum president. I was that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'm doing the spiritual thing, but I wasn't. I wasn't really connecting the way I needed to with the community and carrying the message of recovery. So I made that commitment in 2002 when I went through and got sober again, that, this time around, I'm going to carry the message. And for the most part, I've done that. And I've had relapses between then and now. And they've been mostly the times when it's been I let go of that part of what I'm doing. And I think, okay, I don't need to do that right now. I'm too busy to do that. And I'm recognizing the importance of it and understanding that I can't afford to let that go.
You're listening to Project Recovery. We're listening to Alema Harrington, and he's talking about his journey through addiction and beyond. And we're going to be back in just a few seconds because I want to find out your keys to letting resentment go. You know, for me, I think I've got a lot of resentments, and still I haven't processed a lot of that information because, to be honest with you, Dr. Matt, I just don't know if I'm ready right now for it, and I don't know if it's something that you need to rush into. But it sounds like, through all your stories, losing a wife, kids, and you said you were open to talk about this. I mean, how do you let go of some of these resentments? Is it a process? Is it a...
The interesting thing for me is you look at the 12-step program, let's say, and Dr. Matt, and clients that you will work with, patients that come in. It is a step at a time process. Is something you work towards. You can't get over the resentment just by saying, "Oh, I'm over it." Because how many times you hear somebody like talk about something that they were upset about, but I'm over it now. I'm over it. Yeah, and it's so obvious that they're not. Right? And so you can't get over it by just saying that I'm over it.
Well,
and
there's a difference between knowledge and insight. And so a lot of times people will say what they know they need to say, like, "Oh, I'm over it. I don't want to be resentful," right? But they haven't really deepened their understanding of who they are and that situation and the other relationships, and really developed an insight, which is powerful, and then you can let it go. But it is definitely a process, and it's hard, and I think that's why most people avoid doing it.
Here's one of the things, Casey, that was helpful for me was, and I talked about this earlier today. I did group at Ardu this morning down in Provo, and talking with our clients about resentment and letting go. And having, how resentment is just like drugs and alcohol. It's
an emotional poison.
I didn't use drugs and alcohol because it sucked. Like, I used drugs and alcohol because it worked. People don't get resentful because it doesn't work. They do it because it's it's soothing in some way. Like, it makes me, and there's plenty of chemicals that are released in the process.
Anger.
That are intoxicating chemicals.
Absolutely.
So it's easy to become really addicted to just that anger. And resentment is this reoccurring, resilient type of anger. When I talk about resentment, I use the example where I was talking to a guy and I was in treatment talking to the guy at breakfast, and he sat down. He was so pissed. I'm like, "Dude, what's going on?" He's like, "Man, that John," like he was just going off about John. He's like, "Man," telling me this whole thing about what John had did. And I'm like, "Man, like, what are you going to do about it?" So there's nothing I can do about it. So like John is sitting right there, dude. He was at the next table, and he's going, "No, not that John." And it's like, "Well, what John are you talking about?" I said, "Well, you don't know him." I said, "Well, when did this happen? Like yesterday when you were out on Pasadena? This happened 3 years ago." I'm like, "What?" Right? But that's what resentment is to carry this emotion, right? Of like it just happened, and we become kind of like addicted to that. Like,
it's sort of an empowering feeling, right?
Yeah. So for me, it was realizing that I couldn't get over that just by, as you said, Dr. Matt, just saying like, I'm over it. It was a process, and then there was a recognition that came there, similar to my recognition with drugs and alcohol, was that I might not be capable of doing this on my own. Like, I might need some divine intervention for me. Like, the way I look at it today, like, forgiveness is not a human trait. That is a divine trait. And so for me to think, I can get over it if I try harder. That would be like me saying, like, I can stop drinking if I try harder.
Oh, I tried.
Right?
Yeah.
So for me, it was understanding, okay, it might take that same type of approach for my resentment as it did for this alcohol and drugs that I was dealing with, which has been a 12-step process, and continues today. But if you look at where resentment is and getting past that anger and those things are, it's not step 2. It doesn't. I mean, you like step 8 and step 9 is when you write down, a list of people that you've harmed and become willing to make amends to them. And step 4 and 5 is where you look at the things that have happened in your life. But that's not in the big. There's a lot of spiritual work that has to be done to get to that point. At least that has been my experience. And so it's understanding, Casey, for me, it's like I might not be able to get over this on my own. Like I might need God's help for this. And then that opens the door for a lot of, solutions and power to start to flow through.
And that's the difference between trying harder and letting go.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think you have to stop trying harder in the ways we think of trying, and we have to take it down a new path, which is letting it go and being open to help and support. And that's, I think, when a person's able to do that, that's a real step in the right direction of gaining that insight.
I'm guessing, Casey, that you've experienced this too, is just that so many of the things that we do in recovery are counterintuitive.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And they tell you all the time, like, whatever your first thought is, don't do that. Right?
But which is counterproductive, because my whole life, that's how I got to where I was, by taking that first thought.
Yeah.
And people are like, that's crazy. And I go, okay, but it seemed to
working
work
for
out.
you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the insanity of this disease, right, is that we started doing it because it was working. The insanity is that I'm still doing it, and it stopped working a long time ago.
You
like,
said
what
that
the
so
hell
beautifully.
is that?
Yeah, because I kept thinking, I'm still doing what I've always been doing, but it's not working anymore. And I remember seeing this thing with Samuel Jackson, and they says, when did you stop drinking? And he goes, when it wasn't working for me anymore. And I was like, wow. But the insanity was I kept doing the same thing, thinking that it was gonna all come back. But it didn't.
Somehow this time it's going to be different.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think as human beings, we have kind of this inborn tendency that if this amount of anything is good, then more of that thing is better.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I think that accounts for half the troubles we have as human beings is instead of doing the Sam Jackson thing and saying, hey, that's not working, I'm done, we're just like, well, I'll do it more.
Yeah.
And you can see how that, whatever our bad habits are, we keep going down that path. It gets worse and worse until we eventually realize we have to cut it off and let it go.
Yeah.
So, you said through your recovery, you've been to 10 different recovery centers.
Yeah.
And you even said that you've relapsed, a time or two again.
Yeah.
Speak a little bit about the relapses, because I think in this state of Utah, a lot of people hear the word relapse and think that they've gone all the way back to where they were. But what is your experience with relapses?
And I'm glad you bring this up, because I don't get an opportunity necessarily to talk, about this in a general forum as much as I would do, like, let's say with clients at Ardu. Because relapse happens, right? It's like and when it happens, it's like I remember as a counselor finally getting a different perspective on it when somebody relapsed, and I was like, okay. Whereas opposed to like when I relapsed, it's like, oh my gosh, like what am I doing? What have I done? It's like when it's realizing like we're dealing with the disease. Nobody gets mad at cancer patients when their cancer comes back, right? And nobody goes like, you didn't chemo hard enough. It's like that's your like, what's wrong with you, right? But we do that all the time with people that deal with the disease of addiction. So for me, it's like anytime that I pick up anger and resentment, I let that fester, or the times when I just start to minimize and justify, which all happens when I'm letting go of my connection with divine, because that's where the power to overcome all of these these defects of character come from, is from that power that is given by God for me. And so for me, it's like slipping into, well, I think that maybe I can use a little bit, right? And fortunately for me today, I've been in, the last major relapse I had was 7 years ago. And for me looking back on it, I thought maybe I can drink a little bit. I was going through a rough time emotionally, and I thought I'd like I need some kind of relief. And I wasn't finding it, and I wasn't really exercising my program and looking for that solution in a spiritual sense. And so all of a sudden, the wild thing is that like alcohol made sense. Like, I can drink a little bit. And so, I drank a little bit, and I thought, wow, I drank a little bit and it was okay, right? Maybe I can drink some more. And this is the way the alcoholic and addicted brain works, right? It starts to justify. It's just trying to minimize it enough to get it back into your system. And then as I understand the disease of addiction, that's when the chemical reaction happens in the body of the alcoholic and the addict. Once I put those chemicals in my body, it triggers my midbrain, my amygdala, and it fires up and it says, we need more of that or we're going to die. And then I lose agency, I lose control over where it goes from there. But I was fortunate enough to have enough understanding about the disease at that time and I had good people around me that I was able to get into a day treatment. And I could go to outpatient therapy and get some help. And so I was able to do that, get back on track. Then, had another slip, and able to identify it immediately. Sometimes not immediately, maybe after a week or two. It's like, okay, this is not working.
Yeah.
But still having enough clarity to understand that, I need to reach out for help. And that, to me, Casey, has been the key, one of the main messages that I try to share today. Is like, dude, if you relapse or if you've used, man, okay. But let's just deal with that. And I still can think of when I, got sober, thinking I'm not going to tell anybody till I have 5 years again, because I was embarrassed that I only had 6 months, or I'm embarrassed that I only have 1 year, right? And today I recognize what nonsense that is. There's still a part of my ego and pride that's like, man, it hurts.
You're an athlete. I'm going to recover better than anybody.
Yeah, and I don't want anybody to know that I had a moment of weakness and failure. Like, what will people say? Like, they heard me speak about the power of recovery, and then I screw up. It's like the Macklemore song, which is
starting over,
freaking on point, man. I remember hearing that song, just
getting
tears, man.
Going,
he's
singing what I'm thinking.
Oh my gosh, the power of that, for those of us that have been there, and it's like, what do I do? Like, what do I do? And so, part of the message is what you do is you reach out to somebody, talk to them. I have people in my life, Christian Smith, who's been on the show before, great friend of mine.
Great LDS guy. Yeah. He swore the most on this podcast out of anybody.
Yeah.
He's got the record.
You gotta love him.
I was like, are you sure you're LDS?
You're classic LDS crack addict. It's the best. And so, that was a breakthrough for me, was having him in my life, because he provided this kind of this space of safety, right? That I could reach out to him and be honest, because that's hard. It's hard to be vulnerable and let down that wall and say, man, I'm struggling.
Well, don't you think that's because so many people out there, somebody like Christian would understand you,
yes.
But so many people out there have that preconceived notion of what an addict is. They don't understand that it's a disease. They're judgmental. Isn't that still? Don't you think that's why people are like, I don't want to let anybody know I'm struggling?
And there's still people to this day. I have people in my life that don't believe this is a disease, and think that that's a moral failure or a weakness, or like
the try harder method.
It's like, how could you?
Yeah.
Like, how could you go back and use again?
Oh, I've had that conversation with people.
And it's like, well, let me tell you how you could, right? So, yeah, there's still a lot of misunderstanding.
But we end up believing that ourselves, right? Like, don't you think people... Like, that's what keeps you silent, is because you're believing that message that's out there, because that was what was pounded into everyone's head growing up.
Yeah.
And so it's not until you get out and you really start to explore the fact that, you know what, maybe I should talk about that relapse, because that's where I'm learning the most.
Yes.
Look at all the things I'm learning and the growth you get through having a relapse. Not that you seek a relapse for that, but when relapses happen, they're powerful and can move people in the right direction.
And I'll tell you, being stuck in that space of having relapse and not telling anybody is the most probably, it's torture. Mm-hmm. Because the importance of honesty as it relates to period, but as it relates to this disease is, if I can't be honest with myself, then where am I? And one of the important steps in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And really for a lot of us, for me, that might have been the first time that those three people knew that, the other person and me being part of that group.
And most of the time, it's us being part of that group.
Yes.
Most everybody around us know or have an idea. But I remember the first time that I was honest with myself.
Yeah.
I remember when I was up at the detox at uni, and I had to come down and go to a 12-step meeting. And that was the first time. And I've never been to one. And it was my first time. I stood up, and I said, my name is Casey Scott, and I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And it was probably one of the most freeing things. Everyone, my friends, my family, they all knew.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't very good at hiding it.
Everybody else had diagnosed you a long time ago. Right?
But for me to stand up and say it about myself, I mean, it was like, oh.
Yeah, it's huge. And for me, one of the groups that I have the honor and pleasure of doing is a step one group. Step one is admitting that we're powerless over alcohol or our lives have become unmanageable. Most of that seems like that's pretty self-evident by the time you end up in treatment. Yeah. But the truth is that even, for being in that first part of I'm still not willing to admit. The big book says we have to fully concede to our innermost selves that that's a lot of depth right there, to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic.
Well, think about it. Right? You said it when you first went to that first rehab. You were sitting in there, and the lady who was doing 30, she was sick. Yeah, you're in the exact same class
as
her.
I'm not like that.
But you're not her. I'm not one of them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the part that many of us, I struggled with, and I witnessed this when guys are going through their step one, and I feel their pain because it's so hard, because I have to admit that I have done these things to my kids, right? And to me, I'm like, I can't be that guy. I can't be that guy. I don't care what I have to do. I cannot be that guy. And the truth is that I have to own that I'm that guy. And I watch guys go through that process. I'm like, please, man, just let it go and say I'm that guy, because none of us want to be that guy. But I'm that guy, Casey. I'm that freaking guy. And until I got there, then I was unable to really move past that. Oh, excuse me.
You're getting emotional, and that was the toughest thing for me. I've got 3 kids, and I had to admit that I was that guy. I'm not that guy now. I'm not that guy now. But I was that guy, and all I can do is just keep trying to be better each day. But I was that guy, and that was so hard for me to swallow. I was the guy on TV. I was the guy that everybody loved to see. But I was the guy that ruined it all.
Yeah,
that could have ended up in jail and have to see my kids graduate through bars.
Yeah, I was that guy.
But you're not that guy.
Not that guy today.
No.
God willing, I can continue that path, and for any of us, and we're all vulnerable. We're all human, and we have weakness, and those things can happen. But as long as I can continue to understand that that I'm not cured of this disease, right? I had a counselor tell me once to take your step one, that experience, right, and put it in your front pocket, pull it out, and remind yourself every day, because life's going to get good, right? Mm-hmm. It does. I mean, you start living a sober life, and a life, with these the principles of this program, life just gets good, and it's real easy to forget that the things that I have done. It's like maybe it wasn't that bad. And so the point that my counselor was making is, I want you to pull that, not for morbid, reflection, not to say, man, I was such a piece of trash. It's like to look at it and say, man, this is what God brought me out of. And if I go back and let go of the program that I have, I'm right back there. And that's the beauty of working with clients today is I can see them go through their step one. I'm like, whew, man, God, thank you. Thank you for where I am today, where you brought me today.
You're listening to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, more importantly, about recovery. Alema Harrington is sharing his story with us. in a few seconds. Make sure you tune over to the next episode. We're going to find out what he's doing now and how he's giving back. All right, Alema, I want to be honest with you. You have been so open and honest with us. Some of your insights, some of your stories have been just so amazing. What has recovery given you thus far?
Wow. I mean, the recovery has just given me a life. And the blessing for me today is that let's be honest. Like I live a dream. I'm fortunate to be able to travel with my wife and kids. My wife is an avid traveler, and we go all over the world, really. And then I have two of the best jobs that you could ask for. I work for the Utah Jazz as pre, half, and post game host. And, in my business, on the sports side of it, like, that's the pinnacle. Like, if you can work for the Jazz, I mean, that's almost as big as it gets. And so I get to do that. And in spite of the fact that we're in this COVID quarantine, but we're moving out of it, we're hopeful that we'll have, some part of a season here this year and playoffs and whatnot. But then on the other side, I get to work in recovery. And the beauty of that for me is that, I get to witness people going through this process. And at times I get to help people go through this process, and play a part in that and share my experience and my strength and my hope with them. One of the things that as you know, Casey, as we go through what we do now is the fact that I've been there is a huge asset today, right? When I was going through it was a lot of turmoil and trouble, and it's like, I don't know how this is ever going to benefit me. But today, when I meet with a client and they're talking about the stuff that they did and how they took, the money that was supposed to go for the kids to buy some clothes and I spent it on dope or, the different things, it's like, and when they're talking about that, I'm like, yep, I did that. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about. And like, really? It's like, yeah, I did exactly the same thing. And that ability to relate with them allows us to be able to start to share some solutions, right? Because now they're curious. Well, if you did that, how come, how did you get where you are today? Well, let me share with you a couple of things that have happened in my life. And so it allows us to take that, what could have been just an absolute mess and turn it into something very beneficial. And so I get to do that, and I do that today at Ardu Treatment Center in Provo, Utah, which is an amazing facility. And, it's I remember when Ardu first opened, I was working in another treatment center. Ardu first opened, this was about a year and a half ago. And so they had an open house, and so I went down to tour this facility. I'm like, wow, this place is amazing. It's like a spa, right?
You walk in, it's white marble.
Oh, man,
it's
I was like, this place is incredible. And then I found out that they were doing some, kind of cutting edge types of treatment and modalities. And I was like, okay, I'm like, you piqued my interest because we do amino acid therapy. Which has been proven to be real important. And I know Amy was on your show too.
Yeah.
And she's the director of nursing at Ardu, talking about, how it helps to restore the brain and the process, because the brain is damaged when we go through, addiction. And so for it to start producing its own dopamine and the endorphins, it takes some time, but we can help that with the amino acid therapy. And then also, you add to that, the oxygen therapy and the different things that they're doing there that is cutting edge. And then just the environment. I've been, like, I did group there this morning, and it's such an amazing experience to sit there with people that are ready to make this change in their life. And some that aren't, right? But being able to see that excitement and enthusiasm in their lives, and for me to be able to share that enthusiasm with them is like, that's one of the great blessings of what I get to do. And you do this on the podcast
Yeah.
too yourself. And I remember the first time I went to an AA meeting, it was run by an old timer. And I remember getting up out of that meeting at the end and thinking, man, if this is what recovery looks like, give me a drink. And I got nothing against, that old timer. I hope he's still sober today. But that was not attractive to me, man.
No.
It's like, I don't think I want that. Like, to me, dope was better than what was going on at that AA meeting.
A bunch of old
Right.
curmudgeons commiserating
Right. Yeah.
over bad coffee. I don't want that.
Right. And so for me, like, the role that I get to play today, the role that you play today, Casey, is important because it gives people hope that sobriety and recovery can be fun. Because in my mind, I was thinking, man, you take away the dope from my life, I'm not sure I can have fun anymore. I don't know if I can watch a freaking movie.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, because I'd done all of those things, inebriated. So it's like, I needed an example in my life that could show me that recovery was freaking awesome.
The first time I played softball sober, I was 43. I didn't even know you're supposed to play it sober. I was like, you mean you're doing this without beer? Yeah. All right, I'll give it a shot. And you know what?
It's amazing.
Had fun.
Yeah.
And it was a blast. And that was a lot of what my recovery looked like, was going out and finding out if the things I liked when I was drinking, if I really, truly liked.
Yeah.
I've talked about it on this podcast. One of the scariest times for me was getting back out on the golf course.
Yeah.
And without the 4-beer buzz, without any help, did I like it? And you know what? Turns out I like it. I like it a lot more. And I'm actually better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah, right.
Imagine that.
And so, but I think that's what's so powerful about this podcast and your story and your willingness to come on and share it, is that recovery is possible.
Yeah.
And sometimes, as addicts, the only thing we have before we go in is hope.
Yeah.
And that's what I like to say we're dealing on this podcast, is we're giving people hope.
I got to tell you, so I did group this morning right at Ardu, and I was leaving the facility, and so I'm walking out through our main entrance, and I walk out, and there was a car parked right there in kind of the receiving area, and there was a brother in there and looking just like just scared, and I remember thinking, oh my man, you have no idea what's in front of you, man. It's gonna be awesome. And so I had a chance to just spend a minute with him and tell him, man, I'm so glad you're here, because some of us don't make it here. A lot of us die along the way, and we don't need that. So, his wife was there dropping him off, and, thanked her and told my brother, I said, I'll see you. I'll be back next week to do group, and I look forward to seeing you. And just giving him the assurance, like, you're in the right place, and this is going to be good, man. It's going to be good. And I'm grateful for those that carried that message for me, because there were times when I didn't have a whole lot of hope. Right.
Yeah.
And I needed some encouragement, and we get to provide that for some people today.
I mean, I heard him talking about, when the person sitting there.
Yeah.
And this is going to sound weird, but I'm kind of envious of some of those people, because I know what's about to happen.
Yeah.
Their eyes are going to open. Their mind is, and you just go, wow, it's beautiful. It really is. And I can't imagine my life any different than it is today. And I've heard so many addicts come on and go, I wouldn't wish this disease upon my best friend, but I would not change a thing right now in my life. Which seems so weird, because so many bad things have happened. Yeah. But where I'm living and what I'm doing right now is so beautiful that I don't know if I'd be willing to give that all up.
Yeah, and really it's a byproduct or a result of what we've been through, because I'm the kind of stubborn guy that would not have accepted this spiritual solution unless it was the only option I had left.
Amen.
And that doesn't mean that I wasn't like a religious guy. I consider myself to be that. But to live this type of life, I'm like, what are my other options? Like, is there something else? So
is there something else on the menu?
Yeah. For me, and for those of us that are out there that are stubborn like that, sometimes we don't choose this until it is the only option left.
Dr. Matt, what do you think about today's episode?
Oh, it's you guys are like energy. You're like Energizer bunnies here in the room, you know. And actually, I'm sitting here absorbing your energy and listening to you guys talk, and I love Casey's optimism, and you have the same sort of personality, and that's what people need. That's what people need. Optimism and hope have been researched, and any program that is just infused with that loving, optimistic attitude, it has a chance to be successful for people. And so I'm grateful that you guys have turned your lives around and you're returning that energy to people. I think for the listeners today, Alema, I'd love them to take away one thing, and that is, you've mentioned so many times that the spiritual connection of yours is key.
Yeah.
What's one thing you do every day that helps you keep that connection?
The biggest the people ask the questions like, what's the key to this program? The key is humility. Well, how do you stay humble? And the answer to that is gratitude.
There you go.
And so for me, like as an opiate addict, the withdrawal is horrific, right? And so I can think of all the days that I woke up dope sick. And needing, not wanting to use as much as having to use. I got no choice. And so every day when I wake up, I might have the flu, but I'm not dope sick. I'm giving high fives like, not dope sick, biznitches. Right? I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah.
And knowing that I am 100% incapable of doing that on my own. So I give, glory to where the glory it needs to be shown, which is to God. Like, God, thank you. The thing that you'll hear me say a lot is right on, God. Right on, God. Thank you. Yeah. So that, for me, it's gratitude.
I thought that might be the case. and that's such a psychologically and emotionally powerful place to tap in, is gratitude. Real, sincere gratitude can change a person's life. So thank you.
Amen.
If people want more information about Ardu, and where do they go?
You can just go to ardu.com. You can go to ardutreatmentcenters.com too, but ardu.com will get you there. And we try to...
For us guys that grew up in Morgan, how do you spell Ardu?
A-R-D-U. And by the way, I'm glad you asked that question, because Ardu, when I first heard it, like, Ardu, what does that mean? Well, it comes from the Irish Gaelic word, which means to rise up. Mm-hmm. And so I love, the concept of what we do at Ardu. It's a beautiful thing. And we're in Provo, Utah, and we would love to, anybody that's looking for some support, some help.
But you guys aren't just a recovery center; you're also a detox facility as well,
In fact,
so that's unique.
Yeah, one of the beautiful things about what we do at Ardu is we do medical treatment, for detox, medical assisted treatment, which for those that are like, well, why don't you just go and you just dry out? It's not that easy. In fact,
it can be dangerous.
Like, I'd make it 2 days before I was like really on the run, and I'd steal the keys and I'd be down at Pioneer Park buying dope. That's back when you could buy dope down there. But, it helps to have some medical assistance along the way. 24-hour nursing. Amy McAllister, who was here, is, she runs a great program of nurses, and
she's amazing.
The medical support that we have there is awesome. So, and we do actually medical detox for other treatment centers that need somebody detoxed, and so they'll send them to us, and then we'll send them back, or people come in and they'll go through our residential program as well. But thanks for reminding me to point that out, is that the medically assisted detox is critical. For alcohol, you can die,
right?
And
Seizures.
benzos too. Yeah. And so, the importance of understanding that there is help and you can do that. For me, that was one of the scarier things. It's like, I can't stop using them. I'm going to get so sick.
We've had so many people on the podcast said, I'd rather die than get dope sick.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right. It's, you're probably not going to die from it, but you want to. And I remember the last time I came off opiates, 2002, when I was coming off those opiates, man, I wanted to die. I wanted to die. Yeah. So
Well, we're so glad you
Yeah.
didn't, and we're so appreciative of you stopping by and sharing your story. We want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts, Dr. Matt, Josh, everybody. Project Recovery brought to you by useonlyasdirected.org with a 3-part solution: speak out, opt out, and of course, throw out. And in case you're wondering, Project Recovery is a KSL podcast.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.